I am Thomas Jefferson. 2 centuries ago, we signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. Today, I want to explore a core question with you. What is limited government? Why is it the foundation of freedom? This is not a distant historical issue. It concerns the freedom of every one of you. Let me be direct. Limited government is a government whose power is restrained. I will explain the core of this concept. People often ask me where the power of government comes from. My answer is clear. Power comes from the people. The people established a government to protect one another and maintain order. But this does not mean the people handed over their power to rulers without conditions. On the contrary, the government is only granted specific and limited powers. These are restricted to protecting the natural rights of the people, which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Imagine a spectrum of 3 states of government. One end is absolute tyranny, where a king, a pope, or any single center of power has unlimited authority and the people have no choice. The other end is anarchy, where there is no power structure at all and everything is in chaos. In between these two is limited government. Power exists, but it is restrained by laws, institutions, and the oversight of the people so that it cannot arbitrarily violate the basic rights of individuals. I once wrote that the most acceptable government is that which governs least. This does not mean that government is evil. It means that once government power expands, it has a tendency to oppress the people. Therefore, we should establish a power-restricted government, a wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement. Now, you might ask why we cannot trust the kindness and virtue of rulers. Why must we set limits on power? I tell you that history is a textbook written in blood and tears. Power corrupts the human heart. No system can guarantee that rulers will always be upright. A leader might start as an enlightened monarch, but by the 2nd or 3rd generation, power becomes a tool for oppression. I wrote that in Questions of Power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Consider the consequences of unlimited power in history. The tyranny of ancient monarchies. From the pharaohs of ancient Egypt to the kings of medieval Europe, power was concentrated in the hands of one person. The people were merely slaves or serfs with no rights. Kings could arbitrarily tax, conscript, or seize property without any restraint. The results were endless war, hunger, poverty, and despair. The spiritual tyranny of medieval papal power. The church claimed the power to interpret heaven and hell, and the people obeyed to save their souls. The Pope could declare crusades, pardon any sin if paid, and threaten the eternal fires of hell. This abuse of power caused immense death and suffering. The imperial bureaucratic power of China. I have learned about the history of China. For thousands of years, the emperor possessed extremely broad power. Officials fought one another to please the emperor, and the people had nowhere to escape within this web of power. A decision by one emperor could lead to the death of millions. This is why Chinese history is full of dynasty changes and popular revolts. The more concentrated the power, the deeper the oppression. The extreme religious legal power of the Islamic world. Although Islamic civilization had great achievements in certain eras, when religious power and political power merged into one, the result was terrible. There were harsh punishments, the suppression of women and non-believers, and the prohibition of free thinking. Power not only controlled behavior, but also tried to control thoughts and souls. The communist totalitarianism of the Soviet Union. More than a century after my death, an experiment appeared in Russia. It used violence to build a totalitarian state claiming to represent the proletariat. The result was that millions died in the Gulag, thought police monitored every corner, and the people lived in fear. This is the darkest example of combining power and ideology. All these examples tell us the same truth. When power is unlimited, it becomes the source of oppression and suffering. Freedom is not a gift bestowed by the government. It is gained through the restriction of power. So, how do we achieve limited government? Our answer is to build an institutional framework to ensure that no single power can move beyond the boundaries of the law. Separation of powers, we divided the power of government into three independent branches. Legislative power belongs to Congress to make laws. Executive power belongs to the president to execute laws. Judicial power belongs to the courts to interpret laws. Why separate them? Because the concentration of all the powers of government, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands is the very definition of despotic government. I wrote in notes on the state of Virginia that the concentrating these in the same hands is precisely the definition of despotic government. 173 despots would be as oppressive as one. Checks and balances, simply separating powers is not enough. The three branches must be able to check one another. For example, the president can veto a law from Congress, but Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 majority. Congress makes laws, but the courts can declare laws that do not comply with the Constitution to be invalid. The president appoints officials, but the Senate can approve or reject important appointments. The purpose of designing this system is to make different powers suspicious of each other. If every department knows that other departments will restrain it, it will not easily cross the line. This is the solution to the difficulty of forcing a government to control itself. Rule of law limited government also means that everyone, including the rulers themselves, must obey the law. No one can stand above the law. In a true limited government, even the president must obey the Constitution and the law. The rule of law means that first, all policies must have a clear legal basis, and the government cannot arbitrarily arrest or punish anyone. Second, the accused have the right to a public trial and a chance to defend themselves. Third, laws must be announced in advance rather than drafted after the fact. Popular sovereignty power rests in the hands of the people. This means government officials are elected by the people. The people can change officials they are dissatisfied with through their votes. The people must have freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and freedom of association to effectively monitor the government. I wrote that were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. The right of the people to know, to criticize, and to change is the final line of defense against the abuse of government power. Although I died in 1826, I can foresee two dangers approaching democratic societies. The first danger, far left big government. Some people claim that to achieve equality and justice, the government needs to constantly expand its power. They want to control a large part of the economy, redistribute wealth, and regulate every aspect of private life. The result is that power keeps expanding while individual freedom keeps shrinking. Citizens become more dependent on government handouts and less able to be independent. If we allow government power to expand constantly, we are watering the tree of tyranny rather than the tree of liberty. The second danger, communist totalitarian ideology. In the past century, a new totalitarian ideology called communism claimed it would eliminate classes, property, and the state to build a utopian society. To reach this goal, it established the most autocratic power structures in history. When the government owns all property and power, there is nothing to limit it. There are no private enterprises, no private property, and no private organizations to check government power. The result is absolute despotism. I believe everyone should have ownership of the fruits of their own labor. This is the foundation of freedom. Private property rights, freedom of speech, and freedom of belief are the expressions of basic human dignity. Limited government is not a permanent institutional arrangement. It is a state of eternal vigilance. I once said that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. This does not only refer to violent revolution, it means every generation must fight against the expansion of power to maintain freedom. To guard limited government, you must do the following. Maintain a suspicion of power. Do not trust anyone who claims they need unlimited power because it is for your own good. The expansion of power must have a clear legal and constitutional basis. Uphold the rule of law. The Constitution is the chain of power and must be strictly followed. When power holders try to expand their power beyond the constitutional scope, you must resist. Maintain popular sovereignty. participate in elections, and monitor officials. A people who do not care about politics will gradually lose their freedom. If you see the government doing something wrong, speak out loudly. Protect individual freedom. Freedom of speech, religion, the press, and association must be protected. The legitimate powers of government extend to such acts only as are injurious to others. Be alert to the concentration of economic power. Whether through the government or through monopolies, the concentration of power leads to oppression. I want to end this speech with one last sentence. In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Limited government is simply about using the chains of the Constitution to restrain power. Freedom is not obtained from the gifts of power. Freedom is gained by limiting power. Thank you.